This is the Mobile Tech Podcast, brought to you by worldpodcasts.com. Now here's your host, Tech Girl, Miriam Joie.
Brought to you by Audible. Stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the show. Hi, and welcome to the Mobile Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Joie, and today is Wednesday, November 10th, 2021, and my guest is the one and only Danny Winget. Hi, Danny. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's coffee time. Yeah. I want to talk with you because you've been doing a bunch of Pixel 6 camera comparisons. And the one that really stood out to me on your channel, I'll link to it, is the versus the Pixel 5. You went back one generation to essentially a mid-range phone.
Yeah.
And you also did a lot of other camera comparisons recently. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that stuff. And then we've got some news items to talk about, some new phones that are affordable.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So what's your take on this Pixel 6 versus the rest of the world video?
Well, I think finally, I think that the problem is like we've just been waiting so long for like a flagship Pixel. It's been a while, right? They've been kind of mid-range. They've been kind of changing their stance on things, and it's finally we're getting something that's like that can compete with everything else right now. So I wanted to go back and look at Pixel 5 just because I know a lot of people still have that. They still love that device. Yeah. I was actually pretty surprised how close the images were in the daytime. I don't know if you just noticed that by looking at the video. It's kind of hard sometimes to see just exactly on a video comparison, but it's just the Pixel 5 kept up so well during the day, which we kind of expected, right? Like every phone right now is doing really well during the day, but the bigger sensor is giving a lot more natural bokeh, and that's kind of where
that's the nice thing. It's like I've basically so far really only compared it to the 5A because I've got all the pixels. It's just more like that's the most immediate thing I had in my hands. And I reviewed it. So I took the same photos around the same time of day. So I was able to kind of tell. And you're right. I feel that daylight, it's a wash. Yeah. Like, I actually even feel that the HDR processing on the 6 is sometimes a little too aggressive for me. I don't know. It's slightly different, it seems, but I could be wrong on that. I think that's because they're still tuning it with this new sensor.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem is that all this software is meant to lift older, more terrible sensors to make them look amazing, that they just haven't tuned that yet. I think it's going to take them months to get this right, and use that computational photography algorithms and stuff they have to really match this 50 megapixel sensor. And I think it's just also that binning also is probably something that they're not really compensating for at this point. So,
and I think that's fair. That's one of the most challenging things. I think part of the reason a lot of people ask me, why have they done a 48 megapixel sensor like 2 years ago on the Pixel 4 or 5? And I think it's just because it's a whole new thing. The manufacturers kind of provide you with software and APIs and ISP-based, computational stuff that takes advantage of the pixel binning the way they designed the sensor to be, right? So Samsung has a set of algorithms, Sony has a set of algorithms, and then, OmniVision, I guess, who uses OmniVision sensors? No, I don't think so. Anyway, this is definitely a Samsung sensor, right? Yeah. So I think, but Google wants to do their own. So they have to kind of recreate that whole part of the pipeline from scratch. And I think that's where the challenge came. And if you look at Apple, the reason they haven't gone to bin sensors either is because they are, I think, in the same boat. They want to create the best possible experience. And right now, I don't think that their imaging pipeline, their expertise is saying that to them, we don't think we can do this as well yet. I think it's only a matter of time till we see high count on iPhone as well.
Yeah, I think video plays a lot of part on the iPhone as well because their video is so good that moving to a higher megapixel sensor could kind of compromise that video quality and the noise reduction and things like that. So, I mean, that's what I've seen when I compare it to the S21 Ultra and the iPhone is that you can see the Pixel has a lot of potential, but there's a lot of mistakes in the processing, lots of color blending and weird HDR things that are happening. The incredibly long exposure time for nighttime doesn't make any sense. You have this huge sensor and it's exposing longer than the Pixel 5. That doesn't make any sense.
So let's talk about that because I think that's the thing that I've got the most problems with on photography on the Pixel 6 right now is the more the light fades, the more the HDR or the night vision or whatever you want to, night sight kicks in. And even if you don't select night sight, I feel like it's just like overwhelmingly bright. And I just don't like it. I just feel like it just looks like, like one of those overly processed Chinese phone photos from like, like a Xiaomi back before Xiaomi knew how to do what they were doing, right?
I can see that. I really like the thing I found myself doing more on Pixel 6 still now, before I cracked it. So I dropped it from hip height and literally that curved screen just literally smashed. So I'm still using it that way. But I found myself just turning off night sight, period.
Yes.
And just using single snap only, because that image processing tends to be the most natural. It still has some noise, but I prefer that imaging versus night sight.
And so, this is funny because this reminds me of another bunch of phones that you and I had our hands on that are no longer relevant on our limelight. The Huawei phones. Yes. As soon as I switched to that RYYB sensor, I never use night mode anymore. It's too much.
Yeah.
Like I felt that, in some cases, I needed to stretch, right? Mm-hmm. But then the color, I would have to do a lot of editing to get the colors to look right on the end photo. But in most situations with a P30 Pro, P40 Pro, I would just turn off the night mode or not use it. And then the results would be pretty great. And I feel the Pixel 6 is the same way. I think night sight really helps on the ultra wide. Because that's the one that suffers the most.
It definitely suffers the most, yeah.
I haven't done a lot of night sight with a telephoto. What's your experience been on that?
Telephoto it's okay, but it's not great either. I think that's the problem, is the consistency between all the different cameras. It's hard because you want to use the main sensor. You want to get the best shot possible. But then when you're trying to change to the other things, you have to kind of get used to a camera. And I think a lot of people that are normal, just everyday consumers aren't going to realize that. And then they're going to be disappointed with certain things. I think the biggest problem, obviously, is the time of exposure. If you're exposing for 5 seconds, you have so much introduction of shake. And it just, I have so many blurry pictures with the Pixel 6 Pro. It's kind of...
I think... don't let that stop you from buying a Pixel 6. I think in a year, or less than that, we're going to get some incredible photography back to what we're used to, but even better. It's just, it takes time. And I think that's totally fair. Yeah. I feel like, the telephoto really delivers, at least in my daylight tests. I think a 10X, even though it's a 4X optical, it matches the 10X on the S21 Ultra, in my opinion, in most situations.
I think they need to just put a circle for a 10X on the software. Just because you could fool people easily, just go to 4X and then go to 10X. Even though it's hybrid, it looks really good. Even the 20X is quite good for what they're doing. Yeah, it's because you can see it kind of, once it does the software algorithms, it sharpens things up pretty nicely.
So Google, if you're listening, give us actually a 3X, a 5X, and a 10X on that screen. So like ultra wide 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 5, 6, and 10. 5 and 10.
I think the 4 is natural.
4, I think the reason I like 3 is because I do a lot of car photography now with my Tech Radar gig. And so 2X is generally what I shoot at the most to get that kind of like less wide angle vibe, right? Yeah. Kind of like 50 millimeter equivalent. But then sometimes I want to punch in just a little bit, but not up to the telephotos. So I shoot a lot with the S21, my photos for the cars. And it's the recording I'm pointing at it right now. The S21, I set it to 2.9, right? Just because I'm trying to avoid that telephoto. Yeah. On purpose. Because that big main sensor is really, really good. It's way better, I think, at 2.9x than the telephoto is at 3x in most circumstances.
So you don't find the digital part
No,
of it to be
it's because there's so many pixels. Unless you go in low light, like if I'm shooting at night, then I'll switch to the telephoto because even though it's a worse f-stop, it still has a little bit better. But I find that in daytime with enough light, Samsung's done a really good job. I think they started with let's give some love to the Note 20 Ultra, which didn't have the limelight long enough. It was one of my favorite phones last year. Yeah. And, thankfully the S21 Ultra just knocked it out of the park. But if you see the progression of that 108 megapixel sensor from the S20 Ultra to the Note 20 Ultra to the S21 Ultra, the Note 20 Ultra really nailed it. And then the S21 Ultra just slightly improved on that in terms of processing. And I think that, because of that, I think at 2.9x, I shoot at 3.9x on the Pixel 6 as well if I want to avoid the telephoto.
Wow.
Like, I think at 4x it's fine because it's a 48 megapixel sensor and it's kind of YS and it's bin properly and everything. But it's getting to the point where any telephoto that has a low pixel count, I try to, if I'm close to that zoom range, I find that the big main sensors we have with their optics that are better, sensors better, also the shallow depth of field gives you a kind of a different vibe. It's interesting. Play with it.
Yeah, because I never even thought of doing that because I feel like the loss.
You know, when you're at 3.9 versus 4 or 2.9 versus 3, like moving 2 feet forward or back, if you have that room, just gives you pretty much the equivalent, right, in terms of focal length. Play with that. It's interesting. It's not always right. Sometimes you're like, ugh. But if there's enough light, those big, especially with the S21 Ultra, which is switching from 108 megapixel, that doesn't just do binning at 2.9x. It actually, you know, when they only really use the binning in low light, they actually do use those pixels when you zoom in. They do an intelligent zoom. It's not as intelligent as the pixel zoom. Yeah. But they do some sort of intelligent zoom. Kind of like the 808 PureView used to do and the Nokia 1020, where they weren't doing binning for zoom, but they were kind of like creating subpixels from the pixels that existed. I think we're seeing that. It's like the difference between the Mi 11, which doesn't have a telephoto but has a 108 megapixel sensor, and some of the cheaper Xiaomis that have a 108 megapixel sensor, that it's the same hardware, but the software algorithm is different. So they do a dumb, you know, pixel bin than digital zoom. Yeah. And it looks like crap. Yeah. Or they do a smart like algorithm that uses the 888 properly. And then it looks really good at, you know, 3x, whatever. Yeah. So that's been my experience. But, you know, compared to the 5, obviously, that's where I think you kind of get the big win. It's like you punch into 2x on the 6 and it's way better than 2x on the 5. Yeah. Right? Because, I mean, the super zoom, or whatever they call it, is pretty good. That algorithm they use where they use the handshake. Yeah. Right? Yeah, I think that's what I mean. I think Pixel 6, man, that's why I'm looking at it now, is Pixel 6 is so good right now, especially with that price and everything. But going back to S21 Ultra, let's at least give Samsung some credit that phone is quite old in terms of, you know, how we look at it in tech, but that thing is held up incredible. It's still one of the benchmarks for all smartphone cameras right now. So everybody wants me to always revisit, oh, what about against S21 Ultra? We're about to get the new, you know, S22, and people are still referring back to this. So got to give it credit. Yeah, we're going to talk about the rumors in a second, but I 100% agree with you, because if I have to take one phone with me, if I don't, like, I always have a million phones, but if I have to take one phone for video, for both video and photo, that I know will do the job every time, S21 Ultra. Yeah. Because the versatility, like, you know, for me, it's like, I use this phone, we're recording the show on it right now. I'm using this phone to do my in-car videos. I mount it on the headrest generally with a kind of a clamp. And I do the ultra stable mode, you know, where it's like using the ultra wide and then cropping the video in real time. It's super steady and it's rock solid. Like, I go over the worst bumps, and it's like, it's better than any GoPro because you get HDR, you get all the benefits of having that you know, big sensor. And then the telephoto choices give you all that flexibility. Oh, yeah. The ultra wide is much wider than the Pixel 6 ultra wide. That's the one thing. Yeah, it's pretty. The Pixel 6 ultra wide, it's okay, but I think that it falls apart much faster in both its width and its low light performance than the Samsung sensor. The
field of view is just not, I feel like it's just not acceptable for today's ultra wide. Because even though you're getting some distortion and stuff, that's what you expect from an ultra wide. So it's fine if I think their aspect was, okay, we don't want to introduce too much of it, but that's what people expect out of an ultra wide. They want to capture the most.
So what about versus the Pixel 5 ultra wide? Have you compared that?
Yeah, I don't think the Pixel 5 ultra wide is a little wider.
Yeah, and it's a 16 megapixel, right?
Right, so quality-wise, I don't see a huge difference, but it's just, to me, ultra-wide's field of view, just because Google's algorithms are quite similar between all of them, and the ultra-wide naturally just on the comparison alone, looked better on the 6, but it just, on the 6 Pro, but it's just, it's the field of view that I care about, I think, when it comes to ultra wide. Because I don't think a lot of people are going to choose ultra wide at night anyway, unless they're taking an actual photo. Ultra wide video at night, I don't think it's being used as much. At least I would figure. I don't use it that much.
No, you're right. I mean, that's actually, I've had some phones in my hands that had a really high pixel count ultra wides, like the Mi 11 Ultra, that have 48 megapixel ultra wide, and it's a night and day thing. All of a sudden, you want to use it at night. Yeah. Because, that's the thing. We're not using it at night because we see the results.
Yeah.
But if you have the tools to do it, like all of a sudden, it's just like it changes the game. It's like, I want to see I'm not mad that they put the 48 megapixel on the telephoto, but I kind of also wish they'd put a 48 megapixel on the ultra wide. That way we could get big binning at low light and it would look better.
Yeah, I think future iterations we'll see some different things there, but
Pixel 9 at this point, because
who knows? They could change their mind, next iteration and go back to something else.
It's just that Google moves so slowly. I don't want to be mean, but like I'm kind of super happy with what they have. If they keep what they have right now for the next 2 or 3 years, I think it's fine.
I think it's fine too.
I just want to see a better ultra wide. That's all.
Well, at least the Pixel 6 Pro, the good thing is the video is so much better this year. It's so much better.
100%. I find that, I don't, you're a pro at video. That's what you do. You have a YouTube channel. I do too, but I don't focus on the quality as much as you do. You shoot at 4K or whatever, right? I do 1080p still. So I don't notice, but I have, even with my, non-experience in video, I've noticed the difference.
Right. It's a huge leap from Pixel 5, because Pixels in the past have just been awful at video, just terrible, unusable type of video. And just comparing them both is just night and day. It obviously needs to be worked on. Mm-hmm. Just the way that it's calculating metering and things like that. I always look at the iPhone as the benchmark because that's what the iPhone does really well. It uses good noise reduction, but it doesn't tear up the details, and it's really good at metering as well. So if even fireworks, it's really good at metering when it's super bright, and when it goes back down, you don't get all this noise back into the sky again. It's a very good algorithm that they use. So that's where I saw Pixel 6 Pro kind of falling apart. Is same thing with Galaxy S21 Ultra. It's the same thing. Samsung needs to work on nighttime video and nighttime performance. I think the sensor is there, all that stuff is there, and they've been tuning it over time. But it's still no match for the iPhone. I think that's where it kind of wins, is video department. Win iPhone hands down, always.
100%. And I think that's why, I'm about to upgrade my iPhone 11 sitting in front of us doing a backup audio recording right here to a 13 Pro. I didn't get the 11 Pro at the time because I felt like, the 12 Pro was starting to be quite the right thing for me.
Yeah.
And then especially the 12 Pro Max, but it's so big, I'd rather just go for the smaller, but then didn't have sensor shift. So now with the 13 Pro, this is probably where I'm going to spend the money for a new iPhone. But this 11 I have is I do all my YouTube videos for my channel. A lot of people ask me, why do you use an iPhone? And I'm like, because look, I could pull out one of my Sony cameras. I have an X100 Mark something. And the problem is that it's just so much more convenient for me to use an iPhone. For me, that's why my entire workflow is on phones. Like people ask me, why don't you shoot with an Alpha 7 or something when you do your camera photos for the cars? I'm like, for the quality of the web, I don't really need to go to an Alpha 7, and I get the versatility I need out of a phone enough nowadays with S21 Ultra, Pixel 6, iPhone, whatever. Even some of the top phones are still really good. Of course, Huawei, if I really want to go dig in my box, right? But the point is that this iPhone right in front of us, it does great audio. That's why I'm using it as a backup. But more importantly, I'm always blown away by the video quality. And with tools like Filmic Pro, which I use, I use Filmic Pro so I can set the white balance and set the exposure. Because, when you do unboxing or any kind of product video, you're going to have the screen pops on and it's overly bright when it boots, right? And then everything goes to hell. Your hands get dark. And then the worst is the white balance. Just the white balance shifts all the time.
That's what I want to see on the iPhone, because Pixel 6 Pro has it, obviously.
Yeah.
That white balance and exposure slider is so great. They need something like this on iPhone.
One thing that I would like, if Google's listening, is, and I've had this problem with Pixel. So I do a lot of my if it's not cars, when you read my reviews on Hot Hardware, I do all my phone reviews there, and you see the photos I take, they're all taken with Pixel. but I have to color correct them because even Pixel 6 lets me set the white balance, but it's not you can't set it universally for this session. It's on a per photo basis. So at least now I can correct it kind of in the ballpark by hand every time. But I'd love to set the slider once, and until I turn off the camera app, that it stays at that white balance. Like, no, I'm not even asking for manual controls because I don't really need a manual mode because I want to benefit from all the HDR and the image and the computational stuff. What I want is just set the white balance, set the exposure, like auto exposure lock and white balance lock. That's all I need. And then once you give me that, I can do product photography all day long because I usually do product photography at 2x again. On the old Pixels, I would lose a little bit of quality doing that, but on the new Pixel, I'm noticing it's quite a bit better at 2x. And then, I generally have enough light, so that's not an issue. But the biggest problem is that depending on which angle I've got the phone set up on a surface, usually I try to use natural light and natural background to get a nice bouquet. Like my kitchen has these shelves with books and stuff. It looks really cool. But the thing is, depending on which angle I'm shooting, the white balance changes or the exposure changes. So of course you're going to say, well, use a real camera. And I did that for a long time. I have an old Sony NEX, with the Alpha E mount that I use for that. But the problem is that, again, with that, it's heavy after a while. My hands start shaking a bit, because I'm shooting for half an hour. And with the phones, it's lighter. And also I can transfer things easier. That's the last thing. I know it's trivial to put out an SD card and put it in a laptop, but I'm just so used to the workflow. It just goes to Google Drive and I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to worry about, like, I'm on a trip right now, and I've got to write a story for Tech Radar. Which phone did I shoot that car with? Well, I know it's the S21, but if I didn't have the S21, I left it on my desk. Yeah. My pictures are all on Google Drive. I don't even have to think about it.
Yeah, no, it's
Google
good.
Photos, I mean. So that's the other thing. Give us a camera, Sony. Oh, well, we can talk about the Xperia Pro-I.
Man, I was upset because a lot of people had it, and I was like, man, it's not the first 1-inch sensor, right? But it's exciting because Sony makes all these sensors for everyone else, but their processing is just on smartphones is just the worst. I don't understand what disconnect there is with engineers or whatnot, but
I think there for a long time, and I have this off the record on good authority, that for a long time they didn't want to step on their alpha business. But now they're really understanding that there is a way to be in there in the middle somewhere. Yeah. And that's why we're seeing, I think with Xperia 1 Mark III, one Mark II in 2020. 2020 was a year where something clicked at Sony because the 1 Mark II, and the 5 Mark II, and then the 1 Mark III and the 5 Mark III, which I haven't played with, and then the Xperia Pro and Xperia Pro-I are all from that new mindset of like, we are going to start to incorporate some alpha technologies that could step on our alpha products somewhat in these phones because they're completely different use cases. Right. And they understood finally that nobody in their own right mind is going to pull out a Sony Xperia to replace their Alpha 7.
No, not at all.
But the RX100 business is not going to go away either because you still get a better lens and you don't crop the sensor on RX100, right? The RX100 sensor on the Xperia Pro-I is cropped to 12 megapixels. I don't mind. Because of Z depth, they had to, because the phone has to be thinner, they had to kind of, put the lens closer so they crop a bit. Fine. You still get all the benefits. In fact, Nick Gray and I were discussing this yesterday here in New York because we're all together in New York for an event. Like, we were discussing that and he said, well, what's the point of them cropping it? I want the whole 9 yard. And I'm like, well, but look, do you want a phone that's going to be that has a camera bump that's literally twice as thick as the phone? Especially that phone is so slick and sexy.
It looks nice, yeah.
So he said, yeah, I do. And I'm like, well, I think that's not what most people would want. So that's why they did that. And I said, you still get the benefits of this large sensor and the creamy bokeh and the fact that they have a variable aperture,
That's a must on the big sensors. That's where I'm happy about because you need that. And props to Samsung for doing that first and then just not
and then dropping it.
You should have just kept moving with it. It's kind of like the iris scanner thing when they dropped that, right? Because they imagine in times of pandemic, like that could have been like, we're saving you right now. You got the mask on, everything's great. But it's just kind of what happens with tech, people don't gravitate to it. But I think that's what's happening now. Large sensors definitely need the variable aperture. It's necessary. And I think what you said is correct, because Sony's really looking at how, like, they don't want to step on their Xperia business, but at the same time, or their Sony Alpha business, but it's meant to work together. Like the way that now they're making it easy for you to use it as a monitor now and all these different things. So it's meant to be a complement. So when you don't have that mirrorless with you, you're familiar with that camera experience, but then when you have them together, you can use them together. So it's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, and realistically, Sony knows that eventually the RX100 business is going to go away. I think it's inevitable.
Yeah.
I think it's going to stick around for at least another decade, no doubt. But I think it's inevitable. What I want to see Sony do, though, I want to see an Alpha, like the Alpha 4 that just came out. Alpha 7S Mark IV, I think, whatever it is.
No, the A7 IV, yeah.
A7, that's what I meant, right? The A7 IV, I want to see that with literally Android running in it. So I can literally install Google, Photos and upload. Like, how close can we, like, here's a good example. The Pro I, the Xperia, has a Bionz X ISP in it. So it has both the Snapdragon 888 and the Bionz X. And as they said, that some of it is done by the 888, but most of it is done by the Bionz X chip. So people ask me, what's the benefit of having the RX100 sensor in that phone? If it's cropped, well, you still get the Bionz X processing, their ISP processing. You get the 60 frame per second eye autofocus. The 20 frame per second is still shooting. All that is only possible because of their ISP. The Snapdragon 888, there's really no software right now that can run on that. That Sony's expertise cannot run on that chip yet.
We're seeing that a lot. Like the Vivo X70 Plus also has its own ISP. So we're seeing that a lot. But yeah, no, I'm really excited about Sony's direction on where they're going, because they need to be a competitive player in this game. I think the way that their knowledge and everything that they have right now with their mirrorless cameras, because their mirrorless cameras right now are incredible, really hard to beat, just because they price them very well. And that's what I shoot with as well. So I shoot with an A7S III. And I think
everybody I know now, there's a lot of people went from Panasonic and Fuji to the Sonys in the last few years in the YouTube world. Right?
Everybody else is doing great. Canon's got some that they've kind of made a comeback as well, but it's just, I don't know. Sony's got a lot of expertise. If they can get it correct, they're going to be, and plus that it's another thing with Sony's approach for me is that they're very heavy on the pro push on, like shooting in RAW and stuff like that, but they have to get a little bit more consumer friendly with their camera software and not hide HDR where you have to put it on as a separate thing. And
they're learning. The Xperia Pro I has only one camera app and has a basic mode.
Okay.
So when I say for photos, there's two more camera apps for video. They have the Pro Video Crazy one with the Cine Alta settings.
I like. That's
and then they have a consumer-friendly video app.
Okay.
That's more sophisticated than what you can get in basic mode on the camera app. But the basic mode on the camera app gives you HDR, gives you basically the same behavior as a Samsung, a Pixel, an iPhone, full auto, and still lets you select the aperture manually. There's a little button in the corner. So it gives you manual control of the aperture even in the basic camera mode.
See, that's
it.
That sounds exciting to me. Just because, not because I can't do that, because I'm not, maybe this is a demographic they're trying to hit is somebody like me that can manipulate these things. But there's a lot of people I think that will look at that Sony and be like, oh, I want this. But they pick it up. They're like, this is nothing like what I've used before from Samsung or Apple. Like, I'm completely confused.
And so, the dial on your Alpha camera, your A7, that dial exists as a slider on the UI on the left, and it basically goes from basic, which is that mode which it starts with, to auto, which is exactly a replica of the auto mode on the RX100, to shutter priority S, and then they don't have an aperture priority because you can't, and then they have an M mode. And they have another S mode. I think it's S and another letter. And I think it's like, it lets you pin the ISO or something. Anyway, it's basically what you're used to on an RX100 or an Alpha S7. It's nice because the interface changes with it. And when the interface is in the Sony modes, it looks and feels like almost like the touchscreen on an Alpha, on an A camera.
That's cool.
So they did that on the Xperia 1 and Mark III as well, but they didn't have that basic mode. And that basic mode is just, they had a separate camera app completely. And the other thing that I have to test this because I haven't yet, but I think that the slider for zoom now does the whole range of lenses in one shot. Because the previous Xperias, they treated each slider for each lens.
Yeah.
So you had to switch manually to the telephoto and then slide zoom on that. And then switch, like, whereas on an iPhone or a Samsung, you go from the ultra wide to, if you slide by hand, it switches lenses for you and tries to stay consistent. So they fixed a lot of these. And I think all that came from feedback that we did as reviewers. Like, I remember having that conversation when I reviewed the Xperia 1 Mark II with the Sony engineers. Whatever product people in their briefing. I said, next time you need to do this. And they're like, oh. I'm like, because that's how people use their phones.
Yeah.
Pick up an iPhone and try it out. You'll see that's the standard way of doing things. And I'm like, I know it doesn't kind of fit in with the alpha way, but maybe you can have either separate apps or having a mode or something. And
wow. That sounds exciting to me. But going back to that real quick before we move on is just, I hope they don't bring, the reason why I hope they don't bring Android to the alpha cameras is because just the stability of Android could introduce a lot of bugs to the mirrorless market, and the concept sounds amazing, right? Because we had that with Samsung before, and I wish Samsung would have kept pushing that, because that Galaxy camera idea it's so cool for creators and so cool for people that are in the Android ecosystem. But we know Android, and we know the instability of Android, and if let's say the system crashes while you're recording or something locks up and bugs. That can't happen when it comes to a professional camera.
100%. And I also feel that Sony wouldn't be the ones to know how to do this properly. Samsung at least had the expertise that if they had stuck with it, I think they could have made it work.
Right.
You've got a Tesla. I have a Tesla. I kind of see it as the same, sometimes your computer crashes on your Tesla, but the car computer still works. Yeah. Like, you can still drive the car, the autopilot still works, but the screen just locks up and you reboot it with the 2 buttons on the screen. I know that's not even acceptable for a professional camera, but I'm saying that if they could kind of separate it so that it's just literally driving everything else in the camera, it's just an interface, right? On top of, and so that you can still use the camera. The dials, everything still work. Just, you might not see the screen for a second. You can reboot that part. Like, I'm exaggerating, but even that would be more like a solution to me. Although for a professional, they don't want to wait for something to restart. But I think that I feel like maybe I don't know, maybe then just integrate Google Photos somehow. Like get to work with Google so that you can since you already have Wi-Fi on the camera, a UI to enter your login password with 2FA for Google. Yeah. And then Google Photos works. Or even Drive. It doesn't have to be Photos. Put it on Drive. I don't care.
Because Sony imaging app is...
I know, that's what I'm saying.
Terrible. It's absolutely awful. So I mean, maybe what could happen is maybe it can replace the RX100 line with something like that. Because if it's a different product category, I think it could fit.
Oh yeah,
it would be pretty awesome.
That's a good idea. Because instead of like we don't want to touch the Alpha 7s or whatever, but maybe the RX100 or the ZV line, the ZV1,
the
ZV10
creator type phones where you could stream to your phone or you can hit record. Can you imagine using voice commands to start recording, and things like that, you could have it on a ledge and you could be doing it and be like, hey, hey, Google or whatever, record, and then it'll start doing it. And then you're controlling with your voice. That'd be so amazing because then you don't have to have that second person to make sure it's recording.
Oh my God.
Cool
or like Samsung did with the S Pen.
Yeah.
I think this is a good segue.
Yeah.
Right? Talk about the S22 rumors.
Yeah, those are, man, it kind of came out of nowhere with the renders to like last week, I think.
I think this is really good looking. Like, it reminds me of the Velvet.
Yeah, I like the camera bump is much less pronounced. I think there's going to be 2 people. They're going to be like, I don't like this. This is not enough for me. This is trash. Or people are going to be like, okay, this is refined. Because we're not expecting Samsung to put out something crazy this time, I think, just in this cycle. I don't expect anything like mind-blowing, but at the same time it's a refined look. And also I think the biggest thing is having the S Pen integrated into the S line now and kind of killing the Note line. I would say kill it, but it's basically just merging into the S line, and that's a neat thing for me. I think I don't think they really needed 2 product lines. They got way too close. Yeah.
So I will link to a story here from Android Police. I mean, there's many, but that's where I found it, where you'll see some photos of the leaked photos of the S22 Ultra. And like these are real. Like I don't think these are fake because they're looking so close to production. And so the camera pod is not a pod. It's just individual rings that are slightly raised, much less of a bump. But if you've seen the Velvet last year, the LG phone, it had like that raindrop, they called it, where each lens was basically protruding individually slightly from the body with a little ring around it. That's the design they're going for. And they have multiple, they have like 3 big ones and 2 small ones or something to get all the lenses. And so if you look at an S21 Ultra today and you kind of like flatten the bump part out, but keep the lenses sticking, that's basically what it would look like. And then the S Pen, I think there's clearly an S Pen silo and an S Pen pulled out of that phone. So to me, that's actually the best of both worlds. I'm not a Note user. I don't care about the S Pen.
Yeah, same. I don't use it much.
I think so many people do. And I've always felt like, especially with that year of the S20 and the Ultra and the Note 20 Ultra, I think the Note 20 Ultra was the better phone in many ways, even though it only had one telephoto, because it just was better sorted and it looked better, in my opinion, aesthetically. And I feel like now we get the best of both worlds. And for those who want an S Pen, they don't want it as a separate thing. They don't want it in a case. They don't want it in an accessory. They just want it. And I respect that. I will never use it. But if you give me a Galaxy S22 Ultra that has an S Pen silo and wastes a little bit of space for that S Pen silo with maybe a little bit less battery, I'll take it, because I believe that it just makes more sense to have to have a single product instead of individual products that are just slight variations on each other.
Yeah. What I want to see is them actually take advantage of the S Pen for the S series, because I think that if they can make it more consumer friendly and maybe more creator friendly, like, can you imagine if the S Pen now had a microphone where you could use that as a mic and you can just kind of clip it on, and you can do all these different functions for the camera. I mean, that would be really sweet. I think a lot of people say, oh, now I have a use for this S Pen, not just the writing, which is still cool, right? Because that part of it
I mean, there was the remote, but you're right. Oh my God, having a lav mic,
that would be so sweet. That'd be I think that could change the way creators kind of just make stuff, even just on social. It'd just be like, oh, I got better audio now. I'm farther away. I can frame myself differently, but now I got a microphone that kind of integrates it.
Rode will be angry.
They might, but man, Samsung would get a lot of. I mean, I'm just saying that makes sense. Not just like, hey, we slapped an S Pen in here, so Note users can be happy in the presentation. It's kind of like, okay, well, we're rethinking the way that the S Pen could be used. So. I mean, I think it'd be cool. I think it's a good integration. We don't need 2 different things.
Danny, if they don't do it, if they don't have a microphone in this S Pen, you and I start a business together. We get some company in Shenzhen to make an accessory that fits in the silo.
Copyright this.
That's just basically an S Pen. Doesn't maybe have all the features because we can't copy Samsung's IP, but we can add a Bluetooth mic to that little S Pen, and it still would work with the screen active because that's pretty standard now. And we sell that as an accessory that fits right in the slot.
Man,
until we get sued, but whatever.
We'll make the money until we get sued, right?
Right. Wow, what a great idea. So hopefully somebody's watching from Samsung.
That'd be cool.
Maybe on the S23, because I'm sure the S22, unless it already has it, is not going to be getting that. But look, check out the features, folks. The S22 Ultra is looking very, very fine. I think that it's not, for those of you who have an S21 Ultra, it's not going to be worth upgrading.
Yeah, because I think everybody wanted that big 200 megapixel camera in this, and from the leaks, they're saying it's the same camera system that you're probably seeing here with some improvements that makes more sense, because I can give them a more powerful release later in the year. So,
and also be careful what you wish for, because every time Samsung comes out with a new sensor, the first phone with it is mad. Like,
there's some growing pains.
The S20 Ultra was definitely an example of that.
It had many problems in the beginning.
If I remember.
The cool thing about that was, I do have to give them respect. It was the same thing with Note 9 as well. They had some gripes with it, but then they improved the software. And that's the one thing I have to say about Samsung too. People are like, oh, this guy is a Samsung fanboy. But at least that's what Samsung has done right over the years, is many software updates throughout the life of the camera and the system and everything like that. They've actually become one of the best Android manufacturers for giving you software updates. Yeah. And I never thought in my wildest dreams 5 years ago that Samsung would be leading this. I mean, it's crazy.
No, but they kind of have to, because I think part of that's happened here is that in this US and the Western markets where Samsung is very strong and is essentially almost monopoly competing with Apple. Apple has shown that you can keep your iPhone for 4 years, and we reviewers have kind of keep hammering at Samsung saying, look, you've got to get parity with Apple on this. So I think a combination of consumer pressure, media pressure, and competition pressure has made it that Samsung's there. And then I think, the rise of the Pixel. I would like to say that the Pixel is still a very small player in the market, but it's getting bigger. It's gotten more, even with the Pixel 5 series, which, well, the only 5 really there is, because the 5A is essentially an A phone. But with the Pixel 5, which was a bit of a misstep, even then I felt that I kind of feel like we're seeing more Pixels.
But we're finally seeing advertising now.
Yeah,
for the
they're finally marketing it.
Google's finally marketing this product. That's what they needed. They just didn't market their products forever. No. And unfortunately, sales, you got to put money into it to get crowd hype and things like that. So now everywhere I go, in New York, you see Pixel 6 stuff.
I know,
it's commercials
everywhere.
now
it's so
for
good.
Pixel. I mean, it's
so good.
Kind of crazy. That's good.
So I'm glad we're back on Pixel because there's a couple of things we want to talk about, Russell. Did you see Google's statement on the Pixel 6 fingerprint sensor? That sounds like the Apple, you're holding your phone wrong.
There's no reason why it should be so slow, honestly. I mean, I get security. I get that. But it's like, this is not the first in-display fingerprint scanner. They've been doing it, manufacturers have been doing it for years. So why is it that slow?
I think it's a cop-out. I think it's basically what I was saying, when the iPhone 4 came out, you're holding it wrong. I think that's totally what they're doing. But like, just keep your finger on it longer. It's for better security. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Like, I just came from an Oppo Find X3 Pro to my Pixel 6 Pro. And literally, I'm joking, but I look at the phone with my finger on the screen instant, and it's unlocked. And I don't think it's less secure. I mean, it's a Snapdragon 888 with a, BBK group fingerprint sensor in display. It's on Gen 5 or 6 by this point. I don't think it's worse than the Pixels. I don't think Google has a special sauce here. They're not even like, since we all know the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro are essentially Samsung in many ways inside, right? Like, Samsung uses the ultrasonic sensor from Qualcomm, I believe.
They do.
And they didn't in this phone. But we know from the Galaxy S20 Fan Edition, they can do an in-display fingerprint sensor that's optical, that's fast and accurate. So Samsung can do it. So I think this is a Google Pixel thing. I think this is a software thing they need to fix or something.
I think you'll just see a pretty big patch come out in the next month or two. That's going to dramatically change the way that the Pixel runs now. And I think that's when we need to revisit this thing again, because it's going to be a different phone 2 or 3 months from now than what it is today.
100%. So my experience has been that about half the time I have to tap my finger twice. That's my stats. And it's bugging me. It's definitely, and the times that I only do my finger once, it's slower. So just keep that in mind. So half the time I actually have to do it twice, and the other half of the time it once, but I need to stay on it a little bit.
Yeah, I had to redo my fingerprint a couple of times, and it did help a little bit, just because I think you have to really get the edges and stuff like that on there. So because you know how it is, sometimes you kind of change positions, and I think that's where Google's algorithm's kind of messing up, because if it's not perfect, it's just going to fail.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem.
I think it's a software thing. They need to tweak it. And so that's come up, this kind of cop-out answer from Google PR or Google, whoever it was. I just want to bring it up. Do you think we're going to see a Pixel Fold? There's rumors of a Pixel Fold with the same cameras as the Pixel 5 or 5A or 4A.
That I might be disappointed in when it comes to the camera, but it's not any different than what Samsung's doing right now. And we know that this Fold is probably going to be heavily Samsung again. It's kind of like a more Google-y version of Samsung's Fold, which actually I'm kind of excited about it, because you have to think this is going to push foldables forward, right? Yeah. This is going to enable other manufacturers like Motorola and all these other people to be able to do a foldable now, because Samsung's put in so much R&D and so much into that software. And even that's still not perfect. So you have to think about what these other manufacturers have to go through to make a foldable. And I think if Google makes a Fold now and builds in some software, we're going to see a lot more foldables, and that's where I'll be more excited about it.
100%. And, it's interesting how Samsung and Google are cooperating so much. It started with that, the announcement that Samsung was going to use Wear OS.
Yeah.
And we got the Watch 4 series. I use the Watch 4 Classic for a bit. The small one, unfortunately, they sent me, which with my giant wrist doesn't work. If you're watching the video right now, I'm wearing a Huawei Watch GT2 Pro. I have a Watch GT3 as well. They just sent me, but they haven't sent me the new health app to that recognizes it, so I can't set it up yet. They're trying to find the APK for that. But the point I'm making is that the Classic 4 that I use, of Watch 4 Classic, was too small on my wrist, and because it's the smaller one, the battery life was a little iffy for my use.
Yeah.
But I have to say that it was a really good experience. It didn't feel too different from their Tizen watches. They kind of made it feel kind of on parity, which was nice. Yet it's running Wear OS, so you get all the benefits, like you get Google Maps on your watch and all the things you want. Yeah. So I think it's a win-win. But it's interesting how Samsung's using more Google software, and at the same time we're seeing, Google using more Samsung hardware. And I wouldn't be surprised if we ever see a Pixel watch, if it's not a derivative of whatever Samsung's doing.
Yeah, it's probably going to be right now Samsung. It's kind of weird because you get like two versions of certain things on a watch, like Fit and Google
you
Fit,
do. I know,
and it's kind of a mess right now. But I could see that happening. I think this is a good partnership, though. If they are working together, Samsung has some of the best hardware. I mean, and I think if Google can work closely with them, I'm actually kind of excited to see what Google will do with the Fold, or their Fold, if they come out with one. It's interesting because the material used so different now, and I don't know, I think it could be something good, but at the same time it's Google, so I can see it being, I can see it being half-baked,
I mean, as you said, they could drive the folding software revolution forward.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm really hoping Google can bring to the table. In the same way as Material U is, I think, a really nice step forward for Android 12. I want to see kind of that revolution in folding, because I have a Z Flip 3. I love it, but it's really only works well for me because when it's open, it's just a normal phone.
Yeah.
But I haven't used the Z Fold 3 much. I've used the Z Fold 2 last year, and I loved it, but I just couldn't make it my daily driver because the workflow just, once open, it's too much like an Android tablet. Like apps are scaling, phone apps are scaling, and it just doesn't feel right to me, And then managing the multi-window stuff, I'd rather have, an experience that's familiar. But the reason for that is because there's never been any software optimized for the folding phones from Google.
From Google, yeah. It's always been kind of derivative stuff. So, I mean, I can see this being a big deal. I think I want to see it. Yeah. I really do. And I think that if they can bring a clean experience to it, I just don't expect a lot of software to be Fold specific yet. There might be some one or two killer things that they do. But if they do come out with it, then they're kind of committed. And that's what I want to see.
Yeah. I think that, honestly, this is good news. Even if the cameras are going to be the last year's cameras, look, you expect that. Like, there are too many hardware compromises to be made to put that giant 50 megapixel sensor with crazy Z depth, and I want to see that, but I also think that you cannot think of the folding phone as a flagship as much as you think of it as a folding alternative to a Pixel product. Yeah. And it's the same, even the Fold 3 doesn't have the best cameras. I mean, it has really good cameras, but it's not the best camera.
I think Samsung will do it first.
Oh yeah,
because once they bring this lens to, or that camera system to the Fold, if it's Fold 4, and you bring this same S21 camera setup to there, now we're talking.
Yeah, and it's gonna, I think, another year for sure. Maybe 2022, in fact, with the Z Fold 4. I don't think the Z Flip is gonna get it right away, because it's not the kind of, it's a fashion product. It's not a photography product. You talked about the Vivo X70 Pro Plus. They sent me the Pro, which is the MediaTek Dimensity 1200 version. Still has the folded lens, still has the gimbal, but I think it's slightly less in the camera department as well. Unfortunately, they didn't have any Pro Pluses. Do you know if you said the Vivo X70 Pro Plus has a custom ISP? Yes. Does the non-plus version have that too?
I think so, yes, if I'm not mistaken.
So I should really play with it.
Yeah, it's I think there's a couple things about Vivo that I really like. During the day, I think it takes great photos as well, but the Zeiss, the whole Zeiss color thing doesn't make a giant difference to me.
No.
It does have a little bit of maybe like less toned colors. But I think it's nighttime where Vivo takes a lot of really cool stuff. It's not 100% all the time that it's the best, but one thing I love about the whole auto mode thing is it does do like night mode automatically, but it's literally like a 1 second exposure.
Right.
Like every time. And the results are pretty fantastic.
So I also have the X60 Pro Plus from last year. Well, from earlier this year. Like they did 2 in a year. And I was really impressed. I don't think that has a custom ISP, but I need to look it up.
Yeah.
Every time, so I also had the Vivo X50 Pro from the year before. And every single one of those gimbal phones has blown me away in camera. I actually, when the X50 Pro came out and I mentioned it in the podcast, I think it was one of my top 5 camera phones of 2020, just because of the versatility. And, that dedicated portrait lens, even though it doesn't have OIS, it's just really nice to take portraits of people with. And then you've got the crazy folded lens, which everybody likes to have a nice telephoto.
Yeah.
Then the gigantic main sensor. Now on the X50 Pro Plus, the main sensor was on the gimbal. On the X60 Pro Plus, it was on the ultra wide. And now it's on mine, the 70 Pro Non Plus, the gimbal's back on the main sensor. What is it like?
I think on the Pro Plus, I think it's on the ultra wide.
Yeah.
But all 3 lenses are optically stabilized.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Is the telephoto, the portrait lens stabilized as well? Because,
I think so. Good. I think it's all
the first time they did it, because in the past that 2X that Vivo and BBK Group sometimes use on some non-Vivo phones as well, they have this 2X lens that they use for just portraits that it's not stabilized. And I'm just like, such a miss. Yeah. So I have to zoom into 1.9 on the main sensor, like it's just...
It's a solid system this year.
It's really solid. Are they still using that 50 megapixel Samsung sensor?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the GN2.
The GN2.
I think it's a good sensor as well. But I think processing wise, video is the miss. The
you think that the gimbal would be perfect for video, right? That's the use case.
It's the HDR for me. I was testing it yesterday, just going against the Pixel, so I'm doing that comparison right now. And it's just
interesting comparison. Yeah, nobody else is doing that one.
I think it's a neat comparison, just because I think people want to see it, because Vivo's not really popular in our side of the market, but
in Asia,
worldwide, and I think the pricing on the Vivo is a little tough, because from what I heard, the Vivo is quite expensive in India. And
does it have wireless charging now? That's one of the things that's always been missing. See, that's the thing. They finally did it with that phone, because the X60 Pro Plus did not have wireless charging.
I think it's got wireless charging.
The X50 neither, so they've kind of always missed a bit. I like that they're smaller phones too.
And it's a really nice looking phone. That's another thing.
It has the leather back, right?
Yeah, and it's like, it's got a case that's got the leather on it, and it just looks like, I don't know, it just looks like an executive type phone. It looks really classy, and I think that's good. I still don't like curved screens, so that's one of the things. Curved screens to me is dead to me. Like, I just don't want it anymore.
I don't want it anymore, but at the same time, I do appreciate on big phones that it does make them a little bit narrower.
It does, and I think it gives it the sleek look. But man, I think I'm just done with curved screens. So.
I feel the same way. But look, Vivo is doing some good stuff. I will let you know, folks, on next few podcasts how I feel about this non-Pro Plus version, the regular Pro of the X60. Maybe I can get an X60 Pro Plus at some point, but keep an eye on Danny's YouTube channel for some more content on that. I think you should pay attention. If you're a camera person, Vivo has really done some good stuff with this gimbal system and their cameras in the last year and a half with the X50, X60, X70 series. And we got a bunch of news items here. I just want to look at them real quick. Oh, so yeah, Poco came out with a new M series phone. Last year, the Poco M3 Pro 5G was a really spec heavy or good value for the money phone. And that wasn't even last year. I think that was
maybe
earlier this year.
Yeah, maybe it was earlier.
And so now we have a Poco M4 Pro 5G.
It's just getting
it's out of control.
It's getting crazy.
And so basically it just seems to be an update. In some way it's a downgrade, because they look like I have a lot of lenses in the back, but it's all fake.
It's only 2, right?
There's only really 2. There's an ultra wide, which is a kind of a crappy 8 megapixel, and then there's a 50 megapixel. That's the interesting thing. So it's gone from, I think it was a 64 or 48 before, to the newer 50 megapixel sensor, and still no OIS. I mean, it's a €229 phone. Okay?
Yeah, so that's what we got to look at. Pricing.
But big battery, 90 hertz LCD, 1080p. So OLED would be better in my opinion. And, for just $50 or so more, you can buy a Xiaomi or Redmi or Poco phone with an OLED display, 120 hertz.
Yeah.
So It's not like it's I think next year, like it's getting close. I will take I'll take a 120 hertz OLED over a 90 hertz LCD any day. But look, for that price, I think the specs are solid. And
I think that's what you expect.
Dimensity 810 5G, so that's one of their kind of mid-range, I would say low mid-range chips on the 5G spectrum.
And I mean, it's kind of crazy to see, that you're seeing a diversity in chipsets right now, and you see MediaTek really coming into the market now because we're seeing other phones with MediaTek processors. It was so Qualcomm heavily dominated for a long time, and I think this chip shortage thing it really helped them out, and which is good because their performance is good too. I mean, I'm excited about their pipeline as well. They seem to be doing very well.
Yeah, their camera, look, this is the thing. Even the M3 non-Pro last year, which is just essentially one sensor that was useful, 48 megapixel, was taking good photos with like some 4G chip. I think it wasn't a MediaTek. It was like maybe a Snapdragon 660 or something. Or like, we're talking like not even like anything fancy at all. I think Xiaomi in general has their imaging pipeline sorted from the bottom of the barrel all the way to the high end now.
Yeah.
And no matter what sensor they're using, no matter what chip they're using, and the consistency they're able to achieve, like between their MediaTek and their Qualcomm cameras, like ISP-driven cameras, is really impressive. I give you an example. The Xiaomi 11T is a MediaTek Dimensity 1200, and the T Pro is an 888. Yeah. And that's the only difference between those two phones. And the speed of charging. The Pro has a crazy 120 watt charging. The cameras are the same, and you take photos and they're the same. And you're like, how did they manage that with different ISPs? It's really impressive to me. And so this is a, 20 euros more gets you a 6 gig, 128 gig version instead of 4 gig, 64. You get micro SD, you get stereo speakers, you get 33 watt charging, 5000 milliamp hour battery, 90 hertz LCD, 1080p, 50 megapixel main sensor. And and
it's a lot, man.
It's a lot for that money. But you at $300, like, so $50 or $60 more, you can get the Poco X3 GT, which has a MediaTek Dimensity 1100 and also has a 90 hertz LCD, but has a 64 megapixel sensor. So, they're really, like, I'm amazed at how Xiaomi is literally like $20 more, you get this, $20 more, you get that.
It's really tight with their...
The Note series, though, the Note 11, the Redmi Notes. So the Redmi Note 11, which just came out, 11 Pro, and the Redmi Note 10 Pro, previously to that, earlier this year, give you 120 hertz AMOLED. And you only get a 4G chip. I think it was a Snapdragon 732G. But you get a 108 megapixel sensor, and you get that 5 megapixel macro with autofocus. Yeah. And an 8 megapixel ultra wide. For less than $300.
Yeah, Qualcomm has some really good chips in that range. That 700 series is great.
Just blows my mind what Xiaomi can deliver for the money. You don't get 5G on that Note 10 Pro, and the Note 11 Pro is now replacing that. But you still get like such value for the money. Like, I would honestly pick the Note 10 Pro from Redmi or the Note 11 Pro from Redmi over this Poco M4 Pro 5G and drop the 5G.
Right,
simply because you get an AMOLED. You get 120 hertz AMOLED.
But in that market, is 5G really that important?
Exactly, it's not. That's my point.
Because it's just, you really don't need that.
And then the other phone that was announced this week is the Nokia X100 for T-Mobile here in the US. That phone, I think, came out before, or maybe I'm wrong, but it seems familiar to me, maybe because all Nokias look the same right now. But it's $252. It's a 5G phone with a 1080p display. It's an LCD like a lot of the Nokias. But 6 gigs of RAM, 128 gigs of storage, micro SD, Snapdragon 480 5G processor. Not too bad, but kind of bottom of the barrel in terms of 5G.
It's gonna do what you need it to do, but it's like,
You know, 44, 70 milliamp hour battery. I don't think it charges very fast though. But the nice news is, here's the thing. If you're a T-Mobile customer, you're looking for an affordable phone, you need 5G on T-Mobile. The reality is you kind of need 5G on T-Mobile.
Right. And sub-6 is kind of everywhere. And I think that's what this is limited to, obviously.
Correct.
So if we're talking 5G, the sub-6 is what you're
And you get a headphone jack, like you get a headphone jack on the Poco as well, which is nice.
Nice.
But I think this is, of all the Nokias I've seen recently, I feel this is a good deal because I feel like Nokia has always been a little overpriced for what they've been delivering, especially since they're really mostly shipping Qualcomm Snapdragon 400 lately, like almost on everything, which I'm not a huge fan of. Like
they probably could have gone up a tier class on the processor, I think, but I mean, that's not why these processors are made on purpose.
I know,
to,
right?
To drive the prices down. And I think where the killer thing is going to come is it's $252 now, but can you imagine the holiday sales and everything else?
Yeah.
I might be able to pick this thing up for $200 or $175 or something. And then it's just like
I know. Awesome. So if you're looking for cheap phones, the other one that I talked about on the podcast recently, like last time I was in New York, actually, we're in New York right now. Last time I was in New York was the Revel, whatever their Revel phone, the $200 5G phone that's made by a third-party company.
T-Mobile thing.
Yeah, the T-Mobile one. And you know, in the past, either Moto or TCL made those phones for them, but this year it's made by who knows what, some company in Hong Kong apparently, that's obviously based in Shenzhen for the manufacturing. But what's cool about it, it's $200. You get 5G on a Dimensity, I think I want to say a 700 or an 800 or something. And you get like relatively decent package actually. The cameras don't stink, but I feel like, you know, relatively speaking, it's correctable using Google Photos. You know what I'm saying? You get a camera and you're like, but you tweak it just a little bit. You don't have to go too crazy, and it comes out good. That's exactly what this little Revel does. And for the money, it has NFC, so you do Google Pay. I mean, you get a whole bunch of options, which I think I really like. You know,
great first phones for like people, kids, and things like that, because that's what you need. You can't give your kids an iPhone all the time, even though people do.
Can you? Can you not? I don't know. That's the question.
In my household, maybe, but not other households.
Do you give hand-me-downs? I think is what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah, but these little, the prepaid market is still bigger than we think it is, and I think that's where maybe I sometimes need to readjust because I always think in flagships, mid-range, but these are also very important phones for the market because people need that affordable phone and for business and B2B, all these different things that we don't think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think this tier of affordable $200-ish phones that have 5G, some of them have 5G, some of them don't, but they all have we're starting to see a push, right? I think there's other phones coming from Moto in the future too. I'm hearing rumors where you're going to see, high refresh rate displays, even though they're LCDs, but you're going to see high megapixel count, not crazy, but the latest sensors, like not the 48 megapixels that have been around forever, but like the newer 50 megapixel sensors that have better light sensitivity and all that. You're starting to see those sensors trickle down to the $200 price point. You're starting to see, like this Poco shows, you're starting to see high refresh rate displays, sometimes at 720, but sometimes at 1080 even. And you're starting to see 5G on some like Snapdragon 480s and MediaTek chipsets. And you're starting to see, stereo speakers, but they keep the headphone jack, really large batteries, all combined in these phones that cost, very little. And I think this is good because I feel like you can buy almost any phone and be happy today because of that. Right.
I mean, looking back 5 years ago, we would have never thought that you can get a sub $300 phone with all of this stuff in it now. It's kind of crazy. And I think that's where the flagship market is kind of hurting because how much, if I'm shelling out another $1,000, what are you giving me for that $1,000? And, we can discern a lot of that, but for the regular customer, a mid-range would fit them just fine.
I mean, I would dare to say that if that Poco M4 Pro 5G, that camera system, I have the phone. I haven't had a chance to try it out yet. My unboxing video is live on my YouTube, but I haven't, it's still sitting on my desk in San Francisco. I need to take it for a spin. I would bet that phone's imaging performance will blow away any budget or mid-range phone from 2 years ago.
Yeah, probably.
So if you're coming from a phone, like say you went to Metro PCS 2 years ago and you bought a phone that was $300, and now you're going to buy this phone, this is not a Metro PCS phone, but you were to buy this phone, you get 5G, which you didn't have, and you get a way better camera system, and you're paying actually a little less money.
Yeah, and you're getting a 90 hertz refresh
and you get
rate,
90 hertz refresh.
which is a difference. I mean, refresh rate does make a difference. I mean, 190 I think is perfect for mid-range and low.
100%.
Yeah, it works well.
And I think it's good too because those LCD, IPS, whatever displays, when you enable high refresh on them, you can kind of see, I mean, it's smoother, but you also get a lot of kind of smearing.
Yeah.
You don't get it on the AMOLEDs, but you get it on the LCDs. I don't know why, for whatever reason.
The ghosting, yeah.
The ghosting, yeah. It's weird because, it's worse at 120. So I'm kind of glad they're limiting the LCDs to 90. Because you remember that Moto Edge 2021 with the 144 LCD? Oh, I mean, it's so smeary. I'm like, why did you bother?
I think sometimes, you're trying to chase the specs and it just doesn't make sense. So I think that, I'd rather have a well-executed 90 versus
100%. Yeah. I think Moto is learning. I'm hoping that next year the Edge series will be a proper flagship again.
It seems like they are, though. They seem to be listening.
Yeah.
And that's what we need from a company, right? They need to listen to the customer feedback and other people that use their phones and to make the best product. And I think they're on the right track.
And I think they're doing still very good in the mid-range and the budget with the G series. It's interesting, too, how I think the G series, like, they just launched a G Pure, which I sent me 2 weeks ago. I haven't had time. I mean, it's so low end. I don't think I'm even going to bother.
Too many phones.
720p display at 60 hertz. This one's really cheap, $169, right? But my point is that you look at the G range and they're not even using the E numbering. The Moto E was the entry. Like, I think that we're seeing G phones that are literally in Moto E territory now. And I think we're seeing the G200 abroad that is like stretching into the Moto Edge, Moto 1 kind of range.
Yeah.
I really think that's smart because their G line is really kind of like their thing. And they're stretching that, which I think is smart. So I think we're going to see more G phones. Stay tuned for that. And I'm really looking forward to Moto doing a proper flagship next year.
Man, I need to see a flagship from them. Plus, we need another Razor, right?
Yeah, it's time for another Razor. Yeah, you got your work cut out, Moto. Danny, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on the internet, like your social media handles and stuff?
Sure. So YouTube is just youtube.com/Danny Winget. And then everything social is at Super Scientific. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, if you actually want to. Meta now, if you want to use that. But,
you're in the metaverse?
No.
Is that where we can find you?
That's going to be an interesting topic as well, just because Meta, crypto, there's so much stuff there. It's just, that's a whole unpacked thing on its own. So
I just have so many thoughts on that. But for another podcast, folks, you know where to find me on the internet. I'm at Tankgirl. That's TNKGRL, like the comic book character without the vowels. If you want to chat with us about this podcast, please do on Twitter, and then go to my Instagram for some pretty pictures of phones, pretty pictures of cars, pretty pictures taken with phones of cars. It's all meta. Funny. Anyway, check out my Instagram. And then you know where the podcast lives, folks, at mobiletechpodcast.com. You can, of course, subscribe on all the big platforms, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, we're everywhere. So if you just followed Danny here for the first time, please consider subscribing. It'd be great. And there's a couple of YouTube channels you should subscribe to as well. YouTube.com/MobileTechPodcast and YouTube.com/MobileTechMore. The main channel is really all the video content that goes with this podcast. All these phones we just discussed, including that Revel phone from T-Mobile, you'll find unboxing videos on the YouTube channel. I do lots of unboxings so you can see the phones and then you can listen to the show to get my opinions. It's kind of like how it works. And then the Mobile Tech More channel is a new channel my producer and I have been working on that has a lot of the kind of, again, meta content around mobile. So we're doing things like accessories, battery packs, home automation, car tech, travel tech. So I got a keyboard on that channel. You'll see it's also on the main channel, but it's like a company out of Hong Kong sent me a replacement keyboard for my iMac. And it's very shallow, like it's kind of like the iMac keyboard, but it's mechanical keys. They're opto-mechanical. So, they have the clickety feel. But they're a little deeper, but not too deep. They're not like the big clunky gaming keyboard kind of deal.
Is it the Keychron?
It's Vest something.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, anyway, it's got RGB LEDs and it's Bluetooth or USB-C wired. It's really nice. So these are the kind of things you'll find on the second channel. And so please subscribe to both channels, like the videos, comment in the comments, click the notification bell, the usual stuff. YouTube, you know how it works. And then, of course, if you are subscribed to the podcast on your app, please rate the podcast or review the podcast. It helps other people find the show. Yeah. So I also want to talk about Patreon. I have a Patreon now since June, so that's been exciting. Patreon.com/TankGirl. That's TNKGRL. We've got a bunch of tiers there. There's a Discord server you can join with one of the tiers. So you can chat with me. There is, most importantly, a video version of this podcast. That's why we kept mentioning Galaxy S21 Ultra, because it's staring right at us right now for the video recording. And if you want to see the podcast on video ahead of time, like a couple of days usually before the public audio version comes out, unedited, raw, with all the mistakes, on video, that's your chance to do that. So consider joining the Patreon. I want to thank, I think a French person joined this week, Michel. The last name starts with a V. I want to appreciate you for being a new patron. Thanks so much for joining. And folks, consider joining Patreon. If you don't like Patreon, I get it. If you want to contribute financially, we have a PayPal link in the show notes, so you can check that out as well. And I want to thank our sponsor, Audible. Audible has been with us since the very beginning. audibletrial.com/mobiletech is where you can get a 30-day free trial. And you get to keep a book whether you stay or not. I think you'll stay because it's so good. Basically, if you like books like I do and you like to read, but maybe you don't have time to read, or maybe you're always on the go or traveling or whatever, listening might be easier than reading. So that's what Audible really delivers. They have a great collection of books, and they have a ton of books read by the authors. That's my favorite, really. And then, the other thing is epic things. Like you read for 10 hours. Of course, you're not going to do it all in one sitting. So it kind of feels like a book. You read 2 hours, you put it aside. In this case, you listen in 2 hours, you put it aside, listen another 2 hours. I kind of love that, kind of like looking forward to the next part of your book, And then they have some short content if you don't want to get too involved. There is some podcasts even. So they have a whole collection of audio content, book content. audibletrial.com/mobiletech. Check it out. Help us help them. And we want to thank Audible for being our longtime sponsor. And Danny, thanks.
No, thanks for having me on. It's fun.
For being my guest. Yeah. It's so good to have you on.
Yeah, it's been a while. So
I know. We'll have you on again at some point, obviously. And folks, we'll have another show next week. So stay tuned for that. Until then, cheers, everybody.
This has been the Mobile Tech Podcast with Tank Girl, proudly presented by worldpodcasts.com. You can visit us online at mobiletechpodcast.com.